Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Toronto Real Estate Show with Jenelle and Leslie. I'm Jenelle Cameron.
Hello there. I'm Leslie Pearson.
And today we are going to talk about 7 mistakes you may make if you are thinking about moving to Toronto. Hey, everyone, and welcome back. Hope you had a great week. Thanks for tuning in. Hey, before we get started, I will ask if you don't mind to rate and review and subscribe. So nice for all of you that have done that. We're gaining people all the time. So thank you so much. And we really appreciate your support. It's awesome to have you guys. So yeah, how's your week going? What's happened? You were away.
I've been on a little bit of a break,
holiday, which
and
was
you kindly took over with some clients of mine while I was away. That's a great thing about working together. We have backup as needed.
Oh man,
and the sounding board. We've just been talking about some issues, and there's nothing better than having another experienced real estate agent to call upon. But yeah, so my last week has been
full of a little sun and that's how it should be.
A little bit of heat, a little bit of eating and drinking.
Oh, that sounds great.
And it was fun. How about you? What have you found?
Yeah, it's been slower. Yeah. I think like the week before seemed to be a little bit busier.
Yeah, I agree.
This week seems slower.
Very.
I think we talked about this last week, but I decided that I would drop the price of one of the listings we have to a price that would potentially attract multiple offers. And then I set an offer date. And my client knew this may not work, but we wanted to give it a go. And sure enough, we got a lot of interest. We have way more showings. I think, they probably doubled in the week, which isn't saying much because we hadn't had a lot before. But unfortunately, the offer date came. We did not get any offers. But what I decided to do after consulting with him and you is really, should we just extend the offer date another week just to kind of give people a bit more opportunity to get in?
So I think that this experience is just really reflective of what we've been talking about the last month or so, is that I think the interest rate reductions, particularly the last one, which was bigger than previous ones, have sparked a bit of interest in buyers. And that's supported by the fact that we've had more mortgage applications than ever, but it's not spurring them to action. So they're going to see places, but still relatively few are buying.
It's step 2.
Yeah.
We've passed step 1. We've moved to step 2, the looking phase. But I mean, I've talked to some agents who have shown my properties and it's like, I talked to this one woman. She said, I've been taking these people around
and they just won't jump in.
No. And they don't know what they want, and there's too much to choose from. Now that is getting better. I can see every week we're getting less and less and less new listings, and sales are happening. So that should clear up a little bit. And I'm kind of, I don't know, I keep saying this, but like December may surprise us in the fact that we have another interest rate announcement coming up. Probably won't be a big one, but at least it'll be something, and then we'll have a little bit less inventory on the market, and maybe it will spur some people into action.
And we have some new legislative rules coming into effect December 15th, I think. So maybe people are waiting for that because their buying power will go up with some of those changes, I think.
Yeah.
But what you just described is what's going on out there. We're not seeing the buyer excitement or activity that we might have expected.
Yeah, and I think such an overcorrection from the government, and now there's, I think a bit of a panic situation going on from, I think they're starting to realize, things are, new housing in particular. I mean, like new condo sales, new starts, so condos and homes last month were down 91%.
Yeah, now that's got to put fear in the government's heart.
Yeah, and it's the lowest they've ever been. People are not buying new construction. So it's scary. You know, I don't know why this happens every time, why it always seems to be such an overcorrection.
Overcorrection, and also unintended consequences. Like it's like they don't follow the bouncing ball to see where it might go and what might happen with a singular decision.
Yeah.
And it's, usually common sense.
Yeah.
But, so the reduced price and an offer date, got no offers. You're going to just kind of extend it and give it a bit more time.
Give it a bit more time and see what happens. And that's kind of, kind of where it's at. I mean, I guess people, if you're one of those people trying to sell right now, we've got this other listing, just for example, in a nice building in Etobicoke, but one just sold in there. Same, a little bit larger than mine, but like a 1+1 bedroom. One just sold last week and it had been on the market a year.
Wow.
So, that is kind of where we're at, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. And you know what? We've got another listing that's been on the market for over a year.
Yeah. At different prices. And people are still coming.
People are still coming. Now you are kind of leading the charge with these 3 listings. How are you managing sellers' expectations in this kind of market?
Yeah, it's been hard, and I feel responsible, even though I'm not. But I think it's a difficult thing. It's a difficult position to be in, and you feel like you're letting them down. And some clients, one in particular, will keep asking me what I'm doing differently or what I could be doing differently. And if something does sell, like something sold in that building recently, and he's like, well, what did they do that we're not doing? And so the expectation from him and also for me is like, I'm doing something wrong.
That you, not maybe that you're doing something wrong, but you should be able to think of something to make it work. Yeah.
And, I explained to him, as I will say here, is like, I feel like I'm doing everything that can be done, as I'm sure most realtors are right now. It's just the way it is. But it's hard to explain that to people. And I get their frustration, and especially, I mean, it does in some ways come down to price, obviously, and we've dropped prices on everything. But at the same time, dropping this one way lower than value to try to get something happening and still no offers,
Yeah, it's so hard.
It's hard. So I think, managing expectations is tough. I think it's something that I'm getting used to, unfortunately, but I haven't had to think about this for all of our career.
Yeah, I know, we've never probably had sellers mad at us.
No.
Or taking out their disappointment on us.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's how the situation we're all in right now. And I get it. I think the biggest mistake as a seller you can make is if you see that your realtor is working hard for you, but nothing's happening. I think it would be a mistake to fire that person, get someone else for the most part, because now you're going to be seen as difficult sellers who have, because I've seen places that have had 2, 3, 4 realtors.
Yeah, we all have.
And that's a problem too. That's bad for you as a seller. Yeah. So you're better off, I think, to try to figure out where you're at with the person and work together. And if you've done your due diligence enough to hire them and you felt comfortable with them and that they're working for you, then, try to stick it out and kind of come to some terms, I guess, of what you think. If you want them to be doing something differently, then.
Yeah, it's best to try and work through these tough times with an agent you have great confidence in, just like Jenelle said. But I can't tell you the number of times I see online that sellers have gotten rid of their agent that they've had for a while and gotten someone else. Now, this person must have said the same thing as the original listing agent, and all of a sudden it comes out at the much reduced lower price that you were suggesting in the first place.
Well,
and it sells. That's what you've been saying for 6 months.
Yeah, and it's so frustrating. This happened to me only once.
But I think it's in the seller's mind. They're going, "Oh, somebody else says the same thing." I guess Jenelle was right.
I guess I better do it.
Not Jenelle, but someone is right.
Yeah, this happened to me only once. I'll never forget it. And these people, I said, "This is the price you should come out at." They refused to do it. I said, "Okay, we'll try this for a little while." But that's the wrong price. And of course it didn't sell. 2 weeks go by. I end up losing the listing and they give it to someone else who brings it out at the price I told them to bring it out at.
And I think in their mind they go, oh,
yeah,
I guess someone else is saying it. So, Jenelle was right.
Yeah.
And then they're just with someone new for no reason.
Yeah. And whatever, it happens. But anyway, weird times. Yeah. But the good news is I've been doing open houses here and there. Those seem decent. People do seem to be coming through. Like there's buyers out there, whether or not they're going to pull the trigger.
We know they're there, but they're not buying.
Interesting. Well, we'll just have to see. December might be a weird month.
I don't know. I think it's
Slow.
why we think it's going to be busier earlier in the new year.
Yeah, I think so too. New
But
year,
I don't think December will be anything to talk about.
No, probably not. But we have hope.
Yeah.
So today we thought, we've got a lot of people. Oh, that was something else interesting. So our assistant goes through our database regularly, and he calls leads we call them leads, whatever, contacts in our database that have come through various channels over the years. Some of them are in there a very long time. And he goes through all the time and just tries to spark conversation. And he said he talked to 4 different people this week who are leaving Canada.
Oh.
Interesting.
And does he know why, where they're going?
He said he knew a couple of them were going to the U.S., so he wasn't sure about the others. But and I myself have a couple of clients like that, so I thought that was interesting. On the flip side of that, we've got our topic today, which is 7 mistakes that you might be making if you are moving to Toronto, because as many people obviously are going, we've got a lot more people coming.
Oh, yeah.
So always such an influx into the city. And I think that there's, a lot of talk right now about a lot of things, rentals and, where people go to rent and where they should live and all that kind of stuff. So we thought we'd put together a little bit of a list of some mistakes that you want to avoid if you're going to be moving to the city sometime this year. So, okay, the first one I want to talk about, this just actually popped into my head after we kind of put this list together.
So we may have more than 7.
We might. But this is one I thought about, and it's daycare.
Okay.
So if you are moving to the city, or if you're having a child for that matter, and have not secured your daycare spot away, good luck. And I don't think people know that. Like, you have to get on the daycare situation ASAP.
I don't know. I didn't know when we were having our children, you had to kind of secure a spot while you were still pregnant.
Oh, yeah. While you were thinking about being pregnant.
Yeah.
It was like, you better have it secured.
Yeah.
I remember the daycare at our local school.
Yes.
And I remember calling them when Cade was maybe 6 months old or something. And they called me for a spot when he was in grade 2.
Yeah.
So, and I know there's more daycares now than there used to be because the rules of how to open daycare is a little bit easier. But, just think about that. If you need to secure daycare here, you've got to get on that really early.
Yeah, I agreed. That was my experience. We ended up doing something kind of innovative because we had such a hard time. We ended up going with a woman who was early childhood educator, and she opened a little in-house daycare in our house.
That was great.
Yeah, because we just couldn't find a spot elsewhere.
You also had 3 of them.
We had 3.
Yeah.
But so we at one stage we were considering a nanny, and we were told by nanny agencies that because our kids were so close in age together, and 2 of them had minor issues, but still issues, that we'd have to get 2 nannies, and we couldn't. It didn't make sense.
No.
As much as I wanted to go back to work, I could not justify that.
No.
So yeah, you have to get right on the ball, and then your issues to consider there, if I recall correctly, is do I get daycare near my place of employment, or do I get it near where I live?
Yes.
I remember that that debate in my mind about where do I want them to be and how close do I feel I want to be to them in case of something.
In case you need them.
Because if you work downtown and go to the office, maybe this has changed because people aren't working full time. Maybe now it only makes sense to have daycare where you live. But there were a lot of offerings, and a lot is subjective, but there were offerings downtown in office buildings.
Yeah.
Very hard to get into at the time.
Yes, and I think that's still the case. The only thing I will say is that there's a few condo buildings downtown now that have opened up daycare centers in them.
Brilliant.
So
if you live there or not?
Whether you live there or not.
Yeah.
So I think that there are more options than there were when we were that age, but nonetheless, you really have to get on that.
Makes sense, doesn't it? That's such a great thing.
It does.
But
and doggy daycare in these condo buildings. Also so smart.
I haven't seen as much of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's something to think about when you come to Toronto. It's like, you know, it might be the same everywhere else. You know, you might live in such a rural or small community that there isn't anybody like, so you might face
Yeah.
that no matter where you go. But, you know, here you're competing with millions of other people.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Everybody needs daycare.
Mhm.
And then you have, you know, the private daycares, the subsidized daycares. Forget about those. That's impossible.
Mhm.
I think the wait lists on those are
Mhm.
100 years.
Mhm.
Kid will be long gone by the time you get
The
a spot.
subsidized ones?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And then there's, you know, these outrageously expensive ones, and you've got, you know, Montessori style. Then you've got, I mean, there's lots of options, but they're all very hard to get into.
You know, and as we talked in our recent podcast about, you know, the cost of living in Toronto. Now, I had my kids 19 and 20 years ago, and if I recall correctly, the monthly charge for daycare for them, I think I might be wrong. I don't think was $1,200 a kid.
Yeah, it was a lot of money.
$1,200 a kid.
Yeah. Like, and that was a long.
That was 20 years ago. Am
what
I
is
wrong
that now?
there?
No.
So, and I had 3 of them.
Yeah. Like, what would that be now? I don't even know. I don't want to know.
I think maybe it has moderated a bit with the introduction of these kind of new forms of daycare. But that was crazy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, second mistake is not thinking about your school district options. Because again, and we've talked about this many times on the podcast, but Toronto is really set up on, I don't want to say set up on school districts, but school districts play a very important part in home value.
Yeah.
And neighborhood decisions. And a lot of times people move to the city and they buy wherever they want to live, and then they have a child, and before you know it, the child needs to go to school, and there's no schools in that area, or it's a bad district.
Yeah.
So these are things especially if you were thinking about having children, or if you already have children and need a good school, start thinking about that soon.
Yeah, I always have a bit of a struggle with that because you know, it might be the number one thing people ask about when they're thinking of coming to Toronto. And ask me about is school district.
Yeah.
And to some extent, when some people ask me this, I'm like, you just maybe finished university, you got your first job, you don't have kids. When do you plan on having kids? And they're like, oh, we don't know, maybe like 8 to 10 years from now. I'm like, so in my mind, maybe there's a bit of a stepping stone purchasing approach here. Maybe for people in that early stage of their life, they don't have to be looking at schools.
Agreed. Yeah.
But they are.
Yeah.
And so I sometimes say, let's get what you can get for your money.
Yeah.
And as long as you hold on to it for 5 years, you're golden. And then you'll be 5 years closer to actually thinking about having kids. And then you can choose.
Yeah. So
I do find people obsessed with it. And I guess my point is,
that's a mistake
everyone
on the other way.
seems obsessed with it. And I think that not everybody has to be obsessed with it.
Yeah, just give it some thought. If it's imminent, then you want to be worrying about it. If it's not, then you're absolutely right. I think if you're more than 5 years out. But it is important. I think it's important for everybody to recognize that school districts make up, you know, a really important part of the value of your property.
Yeah, you are going to be paying more for a house in a neighborhood that has a coveted school.
Yeah.
You know, Jenelle and I have different school experiences. My kids only went in the public system. And what I will say now that my kids are out of it and in university is I have now come to take all those studies and stats and rankings of schools
more with a grain of salt.
With a complete grain of salt. Yeah. And what I have found is the principle is what matters, and that can change. Yeah. So bad schools can become great when a great principal moves there. Yeah. And my kids went to very high-ranking public schools and high schools, and I didn't think they were any big deal.
I think the issue is probably more when they're not good, you know, because there are a lot of schools, I think, where, you know,
I don't know.
A scores are really low, and the schools just don't perform well, and that's a whole other. So I think it's important.
Yeah, I just think so. For example, I remember one year there was a big hullabaloo because we got low math testing results. Well, three of the four um, classes in that grade were away on a school trip to Ottawa. So the results were low.
Right.
Like, it's a grain of salt.
Right.
The results were all of a sudden very low because there were only a quarter of the students doing the test.
Right.
But it showed for the grade.
Right.
Like, and people don't know that.
Yeah.
Anyway, grain of salt, but that's just my pet peeve.
Yeah, definitely.
And you have to know, like, in the public system, there are some schools that have closed boundaries. So if you want your kid to go into that highly ranked school, you have to live in that neighborhood.
They all have closed boundaries.
No.
Almost.
Yeah, maybe that might be true, but they don't all. I know my one kid went to a school that she wasn't supposed to go to. She was out of district. There was no district. You just had to apply and prove your case.
Yeah. But
yeah,
most do, especially in the primary grades.
Yeah.
And also for French immersion.
Right.
Which is a lot of people want.
Right. So it's very important. It's the number one thing that most of my clients ask about. It has a huge impact. I would say it and proximity to public transit, and by there I mean actually specifically a subway station.
Yeah, so let's talk about that.
Are the greatest indicators of value
next, and I think that's another huge mistake that you could make if you move to the city is not considering public transit.
Yeah,
if you're going to be taking public transit, but any type of transportation system. So if you're going to drive every day to work, whether you're going to take the TTC, whether you're going to take the GO train. These are things you should plan out in advance and whether or not that's going to work. Like I've been with clients who have stood at a house they've been interested in and put in their GPS, how long it's going to take for them to get from here on the GO train to downtown. Right. And that's really the only way to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. You have to know when you're choosing where to live, how long it's going to take you to get around.
Yeah. And you have to know too, when you're budgeting your purchase, that homes within walking distance of a subway station itself are going to cost you a lot more.
Yeah.
And it's not just, and also you and or your agent need to be on top of plans for transit. So where they're building a couple new lines now, where they're, because that's going to open up the attraction to some neighborhoods that were out of, not of interest before because they didn't have great transit.
That's right.
And so a big chunk of that for most people is public transit, but you also want to look at, access to highways.
Yes.
Do you want to live in Toronto but work in Mississauga? You want to, that's going to put you somewhere versus if you're going to live in Toronto and work in Oshawa or vice versa.
Yeah, like I remember living at Yonge and Eglinton and like how much I loved living there.
Yeah.
And at that time I had a job downtown, so I took the subway.
Yeah.
And which was great. But then if I ever want to drive anywhere, like it was so hard to get everywhere.
Yeah. And that's one reason we chose our house. It was a 3-minute walk to a subway station, but a 5-minute drive to the 401.
Yeah, it's important.
So it was both.
Yeah. So I think these things are important. I think.
You don't want to buy your house and then go, oh my God, I didn't know I was going to be 45 minutes on a bus to a subway station.
Yeah, that's right. Because my neighborhood in the beach, I love living in the beach, but it's not transit friendly.
No.
We have a streetcar only. So you have to think about that. And a lot of people don't realize it's going to take an hour to get downtown in the morning.
And if you're an investor, purchaser, or an end user, I guess, but smart to know about developments of new subway lines now. And because the neighborhoods that are along those tracks are going to really grow like crazy once those subways are in. So, smart to consider, for example, the Ontario line. I think that's going to, a good chunk of that Ontario line is already in developed and popular and coveted neighborhoods, but there's going to be like huge growth up into like Thorncliffe and Flemington and up to Don Mills as that line gets completed. So
really grow things up there.
So like, whereas you might not now, maybe, we had a condo in Flemington Park in the spring, and maybe that wasn't like your target destination, but with a view to future, value because of public transit, probably would have been a smart move.
For sure. Now, on that note, I think another mistake people make is not visiting neighborhoods before they choose one. And my advice to everyone when they're looking for something is go walk around.
Yeah.
Take your time, go grab a coffee, walk the streets, see what it's like on a Saturday afternoon, but also see what it's like on a Monday night.
Yeah.
Just, do your drive around, walk around, feel it out. This is a big decision.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times we get hung up on, well, everyone's moving to Liberty Village. I should move to Liberty Village. But, maybe that's not the place for you. So I think until you actually feel it, you won't know.
Walk around, go out for dinner.
Yeah.
We have amazing neighborhoods, but they all have a different vibe.
All of them.
And, your vibe might be different than your friends.
Yeah, and you either feel it or you don't.
Yeah.
And I find that there's lots of great neighborhoods out there in the city that I wouldn't live.
Yeah,
I appreciate
I love to go there,
I don't want to live there.
But it's not for me.
Yeah, and you don't know that unless you're kind of walking around.
Yeah, and look to your real estate agent for information, like kind of the stats and the numbers and a sense of the neighborhood. But do that kind of a good chunk of that research on your own before, without involving your real estate agent. So you really nail down, we want to be on Ossington. Or we want to be in Trinity Bellwoods, or we want to be, I don't know, in Leaside. A lot of it is introspective, and you have to figure out what is the vibe for you before you run around seeing things all over the city. Yeah. Because that doesn't serve your interest.
No, or anybody's for that matter. Mm-hmm. Okay, another one I thought about was, this is important, I think, is not securing your housing in advance if you're coming here. So I've had a lot of people move to Toronto, not get a rental or anything like that, tell themselves, I'll just grab one once I'm there, I'll stay in an Airbnb, and the next thing you know, they're staying in the Airbnb for months because they can't get something. Mm-hmm. Finding, even right now with the rental market being more favorable to renters than it has been. The prices have come down a little. There's a bit more option. It's still hard to get a rental. Yeah. So, landlords can be very selective, as they should be, given a lot of problems that we've had. And so don't assume that you're going to be able to rent something because you see a lot of listings on realtor.ca. So try to secure that in advance before you move here, so you're not stuck paying big bucks for a long time.
Yeah, and factor in, there's going to be some time to find your place, and then the time it takes to close on it. I had some people surprised that it might be as much as 90 days. Typically it's shorter, but factor that into your budget.
That's
renting something for that period of time.
Yeah. And rentals, on that note, another mistake I've seen is that there's a lot of scams out there. And so don't assume that the rental is legit. Make sure you're checking it out in all the right ways.
What are those right ways?
I always recommend going through realtor.ca. A landlord is unlikely to list something with a realtor that's not a legitimate listing. Mm-hmm. But when you see them on Kijiji or some of these other places, and they're just too good to be true. Mm-hmm. They're usually too good to be true. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of scamming that's going on. I get calls all the time from people using my previous listings and saying that they're available for rent. Mm-hmm. And they're not. Mm-hmm. So I think that, realtor.ca is the best place to go if I was you, in terms of finding a rental. Mm-hmm.
On that note that you mentioned, it was particularly in the news maybe last year about even homes being for sale that aren't for sale.
That's right.
Yeah. So, that's another good reason to work with a real estate agent who's dedicated to your needs and your service, rather than jumping to different listing agents. And so things were going on, like if somebody was on vacation for an extended period of time, or for whatever reason, not around and like on top of their property or not living there, then some scammer coming in and listing it for sale and taking money for a property that was not for sale.
That's why you need title insurance, everyone. Yeah. But it happens. And I think that people can take advantage of newcomers to the city who don't know the city or how it works. And so, these are all things, not to be paranoid about it, but I think you just want to stay with the with the right channels, like
Yeah.
realtor.ca,
Yeah.
I think is the best place to be.
Yeah.
I also don't trust everything that I see on some of these other housing sites that are feeder sites from Treb,
Yeah.
because sometimes they seem a little
So
off.
do we want to name sites?
Well, like even House Sigma, I think they're
Yeah.
probably better, but like House or Zoocasa or some of these, I don't think they always necessarily have all the
checks and
accurate.
balances.
Yeah. So just watch yourself. And then the last thing I thought of, which I thought would be a mistake, is that you should consider not just the city itself, because there's a lot more to the GTA than just Toronto. And I think that the suburbs are a great option for a lot of people. And I think a lot of people will find it's just too unaffordable to live in the city. And I think a mistake would be really not considering looking elsewhere. Because especially if you are a downtown worker and you buy a place or rent a place on the GO line, then that's great. That's great transportation. So there are other options, and as long as you don't have to, I'm not suggesting you don't want to drive every day into the city from, Oshawa, but that's a hike for sure. But you have other options and a lot of places to take.
I guess just don't automatically rule it out. Your money will generally go further, and you might find that vibe you're looking for.
Might be your thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's some great suburbs.
Yeah, we're not talking. We're not selling exclusively downtown Toronto.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think there's something to be said for every suburb. All of them
like
have
I've
something
had people
great.
like if they go to, I don't know, if they like the vibe of a place like Leaside, for example, but then they find out what their money gets them in Leaside. We can often say, well, if you like that, but you only have that amount of money, you might want to think of this part of Pickering.
That's right.
Or something like that.
Exactly.
Because it's an investment, but you're going to be living there. You want the neighborhood you're looking for.
Yeah.
But you also want it within your budget.
But it's a great, great, great investment. I know that for everybody who owns property here, even though we've had a bumpy year or two, you cannot beat the investment of GTA real estate.
No.
And
there's going to be peaks and valleys, with every investment, but it should not be viewed as a short term.
That's right.
Investment, because otherwise you might be subject to one of those dips. But in the long run, there's no stronger investment.
Yeah.
And I'm not even talking long run. I try to say to people 5 years.
Yeah.
5 years, you're good.
Exactly. And we know that even though prices have fallen over the last couple of years, we're still way ahead of where we were pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
So, 5-year increments.
Yeah.
Anything else on that?
No, I think we did more than 7, but I think that's good.
Okay, good. All right. Well, listen, everyone, thanks again for tuning in. And don't forget to follow us on all of our social channels at the Jenelle Cameron team and reach out with any questions. Have a great week and happy real estate.
Happy real estate, everyone.